All right. Well, hey, I am excited, friends, to get to lead us in the next couple of weeks. We're gonna have some other people coming in and teaching, but talking about going out among the lost. And if you've been doing this for a while, you're going like, okay, it seems like every year we just hit these same things over and over and over again. And hey, what happens when I figure it out? Like, is this like graduate from this? And here's just what I'm learning is that man, each time we come around and we deal with a new element, I'm in a different place than where I was before. And actually you're asking totally different questions than you were uh, before. I saw this image. Susie, do you have this image ready to show of and this is super low quality. I actually was watching this and I took a picture of my computer screen. That's what it is, because my an old computer and it wasn't working on printing pictures. But so it says what to expect, 10-year timeline. And it says, hey, always, these things can be sped up or slowed down. And it's usually based off of the amount of prayer you mobilize and the amount of mobilization of going out among the lost. But in terms of DMM, they say, hey, the first 1 to 2 years, the description oftentimes from like when you first go through the training is failing forward. And it's described as going it alone. And I would say for me, the first several times I saw this image, I thought, boom, me. Yeah, man, I feel like I'm just making mistakes all over the place, but learning lessons along the way. And there's some people with me, but not a ton. And a lot of times, am I the only one? Or I remember one time being at our early versions of Gen Zero Church, and it was just my family. Yeah, what's going on here? But the last time I went through this, which was a couple months ago, someone showed me this image. I thought I wouldn't describe myself there anymore. In fact, I'm 2.5 years in, and I'm like, oh, we're forming groups. I'll share a little bit of our story, but Christian community is being shifted, and our church has been in a way different place than it was before. And the questions that I'm asking when it comes to going out among the lost are not the same that I was before. And so maybe a lot of you guys would go, hey, I'm in that 1 to 2 range, and that's great. And you're figuring out, okay, what does this look like for me? The questions that I find myself asking, and you guys are all asking this now too, but you'll ask it a lot more the longer you're living this out. How do I help other people do this? And so that's the element of kind of how the angle we're gonna look at going out among the lost this next several weeks is not just how do I do this and how do I restructure my schedule and figure out my giftings and personality to go do this and locations, but how do I mobilize others to do that as well? I'm not even going to talk about the 5 to 7 and the 7 to 10 because, man, that's someday. I'm just not there yet, but I have no experience whatsoever to speak about, except I have friends that live in that world. But real briefly, let me just share our story to catch some of you guys up. A lot of you guys have heard part of it, but I had planted a church I have 7 years ago called Parkside, and 4 years into it, God wakes me up in the middle of the night and has me go to a park behind my house. We've moved since then, but I've had a lot of major moments in my life where God wakes me up in the middle of the night and tells me to go there and speaks to me. And this one time I'm sitting there 2 a.m. going, God, what do you have me here for? And just very clearly, this feeling when you hear from God, he just said, Tim, I love the story of your church. We were 4 years old. We had planted 4 churches at that point, baptized tons of people. Not Chris Galanos explosion, but it was going really well. And and he said, but you've missed the point of what I told you to do. I told you to make disciples and make disciples, and that's just not happening. And so I've sat with that for now like 3.5 years, and started going, shoot, I thought I was doing well making disciples, at least compared to all my other church planting buddies. We were doing well. Started reading lots of books about it, and that took me to what God was doing around the world, like many of you. And I remember one time reading a blog from Chris, and he's sharing the books that he read in this blog. I'm like, these are all the books I read. And I don't know if he wrote them in the order that he read them, but I'm like, that's the exact order I read them in. And he had this story about some missionaries from other parts of the world. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm going through right now. I reached out to Chris, and it wasn't until like a long ways into the blog, I'm like, I've met Chris before through a journey of traveling out to his church to learn about prayer. And long story short, Chris said, Jed, I'm leading people through this training. You should go through it. I'm like, great, let's start tomorrow. He said, no, the next one's not for 2 months. And so totally against my personality, waited 2 months, went through it. And a couple of things that wrecked me in it. One of them was Matthew 9:38 says, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Pray to the Lord, harvest more workers. Never made the connection that Matthew 10, Luke 10 are detailed descriptions of a worker. And my life, the problem was, looked nothing like a worker. And I didn't know anybody in my life who looked like a description of a worker found in those passages. And I definitely never reproduced anybody who looked like that. And so the last couple of years for me has been course correction and going, I want to learn how to be a worker, because the harvest, if it's plentiful, I better be one that's harvesting. And then the second one was in the Great Commission study, and just the simple truth of uh, that we disciple to conversion. And I'm an evangelist. I think that's in terms of personality and gifting where God's placed me. But this idea of going, hey, you're discipling somebody the moment you start entering into a relationship with them, that was a game changer for me. And so uh, I thought our church would be totally on board, and our board would be excited about doing this, because we're already a church that multiplied. And you've heard me share this before. The board could not have been the exact opposite. I mean, they were like, no. And the 6 of us on the board, the vote was 5-1. No, Jim, we're not doing this. This isn't good. Some of them were like, this isn't biblical. You've become heretical. And so for me, it felt like there were some options. One was step away from this church that I loved, that's seen great things going on. Option 2 was steamroll the board, which I thought about doing. That just didn't feel like good leadership. Or option 3, which is the one I took, which was, okay, I just need to live this out and start inviting some other people to do this with me while still leading this church that's just way behind. And so doing that, and COVID came in the middle of that. But long story short would be the last 2 years, and especially the last year and a half, man, it's been the most exciting seasons of ministry I've ever had in my life. And seen so many feels like the book of Acts more than ever before. I've been a pastor for 22 years, but really the last 2 have looked nothing like the first 20. We started a Gen Zero church meeting on Sunday mornings because we got kicked out of the school we were meeting during COVID. We started meeting Sunday nights. So we've got a group of people that are going for it on Sunday mornings, and that's, man, we've learned tons of lessons through that, but it's been really fun running with people that want to run. And then Sunday nights is our Parkside Church. And we've been incrementally moving in the right direction, to the point of, though, actually, after 2.5 years, just took the whole church through the training. I've wanted to do that. I would have done it 2 years ago if it was up to me, which would have been a bad move, but just took people through it. And people are catching the vision. And come January, and I could talk more about this some other time, but we will be not just a church, it really will be multiple Gen Zero churches. So the word we're going to use, I think, because we're still meeting in one place, is disciple-making communities, but really very similar, of where we come together. There's some shared worship. The major reason we're doing this is because of kids ministry. But then we break into groups, and we are doing disciple-making things, and we're going to do a 6-month series called Creation of Christ, which, walking through DBSs and people talking about, hey, making disciples and living that out and working out in teams. And at the very end, I'll come up for like 10, 12 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of teaching at the very end after they've already done discovery. And then we are doing this, and then we have a meal all together as a church every single week. And so really the goal of multiplication. And with that, so those all sound really exciting. Let's say the other piece would be, though, we've had a bunch of people leave. Simply, in fact, and when we did this, the DMM training, that's when a lot of people left. And so I was just on a podcast with Exponential recently, and they talk about different levels of church. And level 1 is churches that are declining. Level 5 is churches that are reproducing. And so we're definitely seeing some reproducing things happen. And so that's why they were interviewing me on this. But they just they thought it was a softball question, like, hey, so where are you at on this continuum? And I had to say, you know what, for me and anyone else who's in the journey with me, here's what I found. We're 5 and we're 1. That God, if God really calls you to this, is that you will shrink a lot. And you'll have to die to how you were doing ministry before. And on the surface, that's going to look really painful, and it will feel very painful. As you see people that you journeyed with, that simply just training them on making disciples angers them so much that they go, we don't want to go with this anymore. How dare you even tell me how to make disciples? And actually, call me to actually live it out. But at the same time, then you start seeing multiplication and reproduction happen all over the place. And so that's kind of where we're at. And I want to just share. So from our journey, 5 things that have really helped us in terms of not only just me making disciples, learning how to do this, and I've even learned along the way, I need to stop sharing stories to my church because we had such good stories that was intimidating people that they couldn't do it. And most of my stories came out of prayer walking and going, man, people thought DMM was just prayer walking, and it's so much more than that. And so I only let other people share stories. I only share my stories one-on-one because I'm trying to bring other people along with me, not just, inspire them with what a couple of us can do. So here they are, 5 things I've learned. You're taking down notes. This is where you start writing stuff down. And the first one really goes even against the point of where we're going the next 3 weeks, but we have to say it. And I've never heard Brent not say this when he teaches. And it's simply, if you want it to be in other people, it's got to be in you. And so you just can't jump past that one. And I would just say, and more than philosophically, that's pretty easy to go like, okay, yeah, I see it. I believe it, man. I can see the stats in the North American church. I can see what's going on around the world. We need to do it differently. I think when you get to that philosophical understanding of like it needs to be different, you're like, I used to say 10%. I think it's more like 2% into the journey. This is a journey of obedience and a journey of action. And so I'm not just saying it's got to be in you like you agree with it intellectually. It's got to be in you like it's wrecked your life. And I mean that so strategy. We have a new strategy of how we're doing ministry. Scheduling, like your schedule looks and your calendar looks really different than it was before. And I would say celebration too. Like you celebrate things and judge success radically different than you used to. I mean, so for us, I've told our church, it took me a while. It took me at least a year to get this. We are not a church, which our strategy is get people and bring them to church. We're done with that. In fact, when new people come that aren't Christians, I'm kind of like, this is going to be awkward for you, which is so opposite of how our church's ever been. Instead, we're a strategy about empowering people to bring church to their community. In our area, 60% of people have said on every survey, they're not coming to church no matter what. So 40% of people are, only 7% are actually going to church. But so really means that all the churches in my area are fighting for the same 33%, people that aren't going, that would be open to it. That's great. There's plenty of those churches. We're going to be one of the few that's going to go after the 60 that aren't even thinking about it or even would go if they're invited. So that's the first one. It's got to be in you. And so I would just ask those questions. Are you living it out? Are you a disciple worth multiplying? And if you don't get that one down, then all the other stuff doesn't make sense. So that's the first one. The second is, and this is a no-brainer, maybe some of you guys can skip past this. I just took me a long time. And that is there are different personalities. Here's a lesson I've learned 400 times. Not everybody's like Jim. And that's a really good thing. But I want us to look at 2 passages here. Could someone look up 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23? And can someone put a hand up and say they'll do that? 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23? Or unmute and say that. Okay, I saw that. Margot, that'd be great. Brian, will you look up 1 Corinthians 7, 17 to 24? And I just want to ask a couple questions based on these passages. So, Margaret, you got that, the first one? If everyone, you should read along with it. 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23.
19 to 24. Got it.
Yeah, good.
And this is the NIV for a change. Hold on. I need a little more light, folks. Sorry.
Now you're building suspense. This is perfect.
For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain.
1 Corinthians 9, 19.
9. Oh, 19. I beg your pardon. I went to 9.
That one was about Jim's personality.
More.
Yeah. We set that up beforehand. Yeah, good job.
Okay, 19. This is the real deal.
Here we go.
Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I become like a Jew. To win Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings.
Perfect, right there. That's great.
Okay.
So let me just ask this. Hey, how many would say as you hear that passage, you're pretty inspired by it and your thoughts are like, put me in, coach, I want to do that? Just see your hand if you're going, that's me. Okay. That's sure me. I'm like, come on. Yeah, let's go. And here's what I found. So one of the people that you want to look for are catalytic leaders that are like this passage was described. Right? And this is Paul. This isn't every Christian that Paul interacted with. Not saying it shouldn't be, but it's this idea of going, man, whatever it takes. For me, I've started playing soccer on Tuesdays, and I'm the only white guy there, and it's all Spanish speakers, and I'm on day 227 of Duolingo in Spanish because God's called me to this specific area, and I realize there's some things about me, like how I speak, that need to change if we're going to reach this area. And I'm on first name basis with all these guys, and I've been welcomed into the group. Right? That would be maybe an application of living out this path. A lot of us on this group would go, man, that makes sense to me. I get that. Here's what I found though. Not every Christian is incredibly inspired by this passage. They should be, but there's something wrong with them. Or they're more intimidated and going, man, God, I want you to use me. But this idea of changing things about me to reach people I've never reached, whew, I'm just like, that's my wife. My wife, man, loves Jesus, maybe more than me. And she gets super excited about the D and the first M, disciple making. And she has shifted and grown a ton. The movement piece, the moment I start talking to her, she smiles and nods to be supportive, but she just hasn't caught that. But you know what? The Bible calls us to make disciples. I don't know if it calls everybody to go make movements, right? And so anyways, the first is you're looking for catalytic leaders, and not everybody's a catalytic leader. And if they're not like what's described here with Paul, that doesn't mean they don't fit in. You want to find them because ministry is going to, man, expand and multiply when you find them. But that's not the only person to find. The second one is found in 1 Corinthians 7, 17 to 24. Brian, will you read that one?
Nevertheless, each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each one should remain in the situation which he was in when God called him. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although if you can gain your freedom, do so. For he who was a slave when he was called by the Lord is the Lord's freedman. Similarly, he who was a free man when he was called is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brothers, each man as responsible to God should remain in the situation God called him to.
So this passage has incredible implications, I think, for persons of peace and how we do ministry. Right? 3 different times it says in these couple verses, they should be remain in the situation in which where God has called them. So we so often have done evangelism by extraction, where we pull that person out and disciple them away, instead of disciple them where they're in the middle of where they're at, so that you can reach everybody. But I'm saying too, there's major implications too, I think, when it comes to disciple making, just with Christians. There's some that connect with that last passage. I will become whatever it takes to go reach other people. There's a lot of others that they need to be just obedient to live out in their natural networks of where they're at, to learn how to be disciple makers and make disciples. And we just say that's a second group. If you want to learn how to, get other people to go among the lost, is to think, I can't just grab my catalytic leaders that are on fire like me. Also, how do I find others that maybe are not like that, but they do love Jesus like crazy. They do want to be obedient. And God has specifically and intentionally place them right where they're at. And they're going to be the ones that are going to reach their oikos. And they're not going to necessarily, at least at first, step into other oikoses, but they're going to learn how to reach theirs. And if you have a group of them, especially around a catalytic leader, that's dangerous. And you'll find that you don't lose any momentum. It's actually really exciting. But those people are a little bit harder to catch fire, to get it, because they could go kind of either way. The group that you can have, and Chris and I were just talking about this on the phone yesterday, is you can't get the people that go, I'm not going to do this. And so you lower the bar so low so that they finally are like, what they're not doing actually gets them in. Or they say that they'll do it, but they don't actually follow it up with action. But those are 3 different groups. And I just want to say, you want to rally the top 2, not the third one you need to not have. But catalytic leaders, man, no brainers. You got to find those and pour into them like crazy. But then those that are willing to reach their oikos and be obedient, that's incredibly important. I think when you read about movements happening, it's less about the catalytic leaders, and it's more about every Christian is really following Jesus, realizing how to reach their networks. And so finding them. But then that third group that goes, I'm not going to do that, they actually will hurt your Gen Zero church. And being able to find, how can I pull as many as I can to that second category? But the ones that aren't, I'm learning, have a DTR with them, define the relationship, and meaning, hey, it doesn't seem like this is something you really want to do. Maybe you're not supposed to be here anymore. Maybe I should revisit some later on time you can be here. So that'd be just the second, is that there's different kind of personalities, and not try to make everybody just like you. Here's number 3. And that would just be, this is a lifestyle. It's not an activity. I think for me early on, I was thinking, okay, so if I just put in my schedule a couple days a week where I'm intentionally going out on the loss, which for me, a lot of it was prayer walking at first, then I'm living this out. And if other people can just start, doing that, then it's okay. And that's good, but it needs to instead become more, this is just who you are, and wherever you go. And so let me walk through some specific ways of how you can invite other people to go out on the lost. So one of them is prayer walking. But here's what I found. Once again, there's a lot of people, other people found this out. Prayer walking is not something they're super excited about. Going and talking to, and when I say prayer walking, I usually mean praying. I needed to find that. Not just praying, but going and then talking to people while you're praying. And it's a great experience. I'd say everyone should try. But for some people, that's so outside their personality of talking to a complete stranger that actually freaks them out to actually then make disciples in other ways. For sure, that's one way. And I would say if you're a Catholic leader, that's probably something you should have as in your schedule. It's a good thing. And inviting others to try it out with you and find others that can. This last week, we were walking with a friend named Tim, met a guy, this is like 6 days ago, named Josh. He's walking his 1-year-old. Josh, we say, hey, can we pray for you? You could have one miracle happen in your life. What would it be? Josh responds, man, me and my wife grew up in homes where there was no God whatsoever. I don't think I've ever had someone ever ask me the question, what can I pray for you? He said, I don't even know how to answer. I'm like, well, what's going on in your life? And he shares with me some stuff at work. And I said, I'd love to pray for that. Can I share a story with you from the Bible first? He's like, yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard a story from the Bible before. All right. Man, we, for the next 15, 20 minutes, are walking along with his 1-year-old, sharing a story with him and interacting about the story. He loved it. At the end, I said, would you want to hear more stories? I would love to, Jim. And since then, we've talked on the phone several times and sharing more stories back up. So that's for sure a way that God does it, but it's not the only way. Also would just simply be training people how to, when they're out among the lost, how to be fully intentional and present. So coaching your kids' sports team, or not coaching, but being there at every practice and having every other parent's name written down on a piece of paper and going, I'm going to intentionally have conversations with all of them. Learning how to do that is a great way. Not just being there, but actually going with intentionality. I'm trying to reach others. And then you get to start meeting people from other teams and stuff like that. I said lifestyle, but just this idea also of going, okay, where are the places that I go? And then, so when I go to the grocery store, I'm going to go to at the same time every week. So I see the same checkout person every time, have moving along spiritual conversations with them. Or I'm going to get my hair cut for the same person every time. And this could be with your neighbors. I'm going to, go walking at the same time so I can see some of these people. And then a fourth one would just be oikos. And I've actually learned this, is that start with your oikos, and your oikos is probably much bigger than you thought. I might have shared this a couple of weeks ago, but for me, I have not deleted contacts from my phone for like 15 years, so which is unhealthy. But so I'm starting to go through those, like 20 a week, and I just text them and go, "Hey, I haven't talked to you for a long time." A lot of them like 7, 8, 9, 10 years. How's it going? Is this still your phone? And if they respond, then I start getting into a conversation with them. But here's what I found: every week I do this. By the way, I'm like 7 weeks in. I'm on the letter E. That's how bad it is. And these are just people I haven't talked to. But every week, there's 2 or 3 people that turns into a meeting. Several groups have come just from people that were already in my phone. I'm going up and talking to strangers. And I didn't even realize there's people on my phone that were ready to roll. I haven't even touched my Facebook account. That's going to be all kinds of gnarly. But just saying, so as you think about with people, share some different options and let them come along with you to try those out. Does that make sense? That's just so is the entryway for people can be really different for others. And I've learned this too, is that yeah, different people have different personalities and they'll figure it out. And it's better to invite people into an activity than it is to a training if they're not the catalytic leader. So that's my next one, is simply is inviting people to action instead of inviting people to a training. Catalytic leaders, man, you want them to go through the training, they'll eat up everything. That's all of us, right? That's why we're on this coaching call right now. It's because we're like, oh my goodness, this is so good, and this is great. And I've trained a ton of people who didn't feel that same way. And I realized, man, I think in some ways, I was like, what's wrong with you? How do you not, like, life changed because of this? Instead, invite them to an activity like, hey, I've been doing this thing called prayer calendar. Would you want to try this out? And as they start doing that, they start getting excited about disciple making because of the stories that come from it. And they didn't get pumped up necessarily through the training, intellectually learning it, but they did because they did this prayer calendar. Or, hey, do you want to come play soccer with me with these guys? And they just watch it firsthand and see what's going on there. Hey, I've been reaching out to 20 people in my oikos. You want to try this, but just do it with 3 a week and see what happens. 2 are the easiest ones. And so get them having disciple making habits. And then they start having questions about, well, what do I do when this happens? And then the coaching on the spot is way more powerful than just giving them all training all up front before they're even doing it. Does that make sense? So that's been something that's been huge. If it's someone you think's a catalytic leader, get them in the training. And man, it's fun. If you think they might be, 1%, do that. If the goal is just going, I want to get them to make disciples, invite them into activity before getting them to do a training. The training might actually freak them out. I found just talking about the movements going on around the world, many people are like, I got enough problems in my life already. Jim, that'd be great to see those movements happen, but I'm just not there. And so instead to go, what does this practically look like for you? And then along the line, then you get to go, the stuff you're doing now, you won't believe it, but that's actually what they're doing around the world to see movements happen. And what if enough people like you started doing this, we could see movements happen here. So that was 4. And then here's my last one. And then we can have some discussion about this. Because I've just learned to simplify the process. And when you're talking to people, the goal is not to immediately identify this as a person who could lead a group. Instead, you want to take some steps. And the first step is to find out, are they just spiritually interested? Is this someone who is open to having a spiritual conversation? And if so, that's great. Celebrate it. Just don't call them a person of peace, because they're a long ways from that. But then you want to find out, are they a spiritual sharer? Meaning, will they share what they learned? Will they share it with somebody else? And the simplest sharing is a big win. So you share a story with them and go, can you think of somebody in your life you could share this story with? And I usually follow it up with, what does that teach you about God? How could you apply it to your life? Just, mini super simple DBS. And a lot of times, well, I could share this with my spouse. I could share this with my kids. Great. Hey, do that. And once you do that, then text me back and tell me how it went. And I want them, here's what I've learned. I want them to do that 3 or 4 times before I will ever even mention the letters DBS. I want to see, is this a person that's actually will share? They're not just interested, but they'll actually share it with others. Man, I have invested way too much time in people that were not spiritual sharers, let alone persons of peace. And so you can find that much simpler by just, man, I'm going to share a short story with you. So I've got people that I'll connect with on the phone for 10 minutes once a week, but I wait for them to text me back. Hey, I did it, Jim. Great. And I want to see that happen a couple times before I go, hey, it's been so cool, man, doing these stories with you and you share them with other people. Hey, this is actually just a part of a bigger thing. It's actually called a discovery study. And I've been asking you 2 questions. It's actually 7. And there's way more you could learn through this. And discovery studies aren't so much just like share with one person, it's gather a group together. Hey, you've been sharing the story with people? Have they been interested? Yeah. Do you think they might be interested in more as well? Yeah. Hey, what if you gathered all these people you've been sharing these stories with together? And could I come over to your house and I'll teach you one time how to do a group together? And I've learned it's another topic, but man, be there for those first couple, not more than 3, but at least 1. Make it an event, like we're actually doing this. That because that's one of the things that stops people is getting. I've found at least be there for the first one, but and then man, discovery Bible study. The odds of that happening go way up because you're actually meeting with somebody who shares. So and then once you start, and the stories that I share are normally stories coming out of stories of hope. We use kind of 7 core stories. They're just really easy stories of Jesus. When it gets into a discovery Bible study, that's when then we go, hey, let's kick in with grace into Christ. And now there's more of a commitment. So let me just say my 5 again, and then we can talk about it, or you guys can go to your groups. But the 5 big things I've learned is first one is it's got to be in you. You're actually got to be living this out. And most people I've talked to, I've found this out. It's at least a year, the first year. And Victor John, he came on and told us it took him 5 years. So a guy that was a part of leading a movement that saw 12 million people, right, get baptized, maybe it should take us longer, but at least a year probably is going to be mostly inward work in your life. And inward work will never end, but that's going to take a while. But it's got to be in you. And then second is there's different personalities. And you want to look for catalytic leaders, but also people that are going, I'm going to reach my oicast. And those are 2 different people, and you reach them differently. Third then, is just is this a lifestyle 9 activity, and you got to help people with entryways to get going. And then fourth one is invite them though into some habits that they're living out. If they're someone who's just going to reach their oikos, instead of just inviting them to a training, get them to just start doing it. And then finally, hey, start with spiritual interest, move to spiritual sharers, move to, at that point, and then it could be someone who's really a person of peace and they're ready to roll.